One of the first things that I wondered when I became interested in video editing and content creation was, how do they do that? And now I have the opportunity to answer that question. Sundance Guides had asked if I could make a video about my video editing, what I use, and how I do it. And to that, I say yes. In this video, my goal is to explain how and why I do things a certain way, as well as share a few helpful tips that I've learned along the way. And right off the bat, before I begin on my editing breakdown, I want to touch on a few tips. Starting with discounts. Video editing can get expensive, but it doesn't have to be. Sometimes doing a little bit more research than necessary can save you a few dollars. If you're a college student, you're already eligible for a pretty nice discount. Sometimes your college will have deals with software companies as well. For example, at my college, I can get a year-long subscription to the entire Adobe Creative Cloud Suite for $65 a year. And even then, there are specific computers in the library that are dedicated to these programs that you can access for free. If that's not the case for you, but you're still a college student, Adobe offers student plans starting at $20 a month for the first year. And if you don't feel like paying money, there are plenty of other alternatives that are free or cost less money, such as Final Cut Pro for Apple users or DaVinci Resolve. And if you're not a college student at all, there's no need to worry. There are custom packages for specific uses that are offered at cheaper prices. Next tip, learn the program. I cannot stress this enough. Whatever program you decide to use, make sure you learn how to use the tools within the program and not just cool effects. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong to look up how to do a certain effect. I mean, that's how I learned how to use a lot of the tools within the editing program. But just make sure you take the time to actually understand what and why that tool does what it does. Learning the tools will make solving issues when they come up a whole lot easier. It'll also just allow you to have a better creative thinking strategy and experiment with your creative style in videos. Next tip, all programs are similar. Something that you'll come to learn about video editing is that it's all about problem solving. Although I'll be primarily talking about Adobe Premiere Pro in this video, a lot of the things that I'm going to say will pretty much translate across whatever program you use. So just because something can be done in a certain way in one program doesn't mean you can't recreate it in another. Many video editing programs are similar, you just have to learn how to use them. Next tip, know the context / have a story for your video. Knowing the purpose behind your video is the biggest factor in creating a great video. Not only that, but making sure that the video actually has a purpose is important as well. A pointless video with no story will gain no traction. The last thing you want to do is waste someone's time. So to put things simply, make sure your video has a good story and has a purpose. Next tip, know your gear. This one's pretty straightforward. It just makes the filming process a whole lot easier when it comes to actually filming. The more you're able to edit in camera, the less post-processing you'll need in the editing process. One of the biggest ones is just mainly knowing your frame rates and the purpose for each one, and you'll be golden. Next tip, practice. Last but not least, just practice. No one becomes a god at whatever they're interested in overnight. Consistent practice will lead to consistently better videos, and you'll be able to see that progress as you make more videos. So now with all those pre-editing tips out of the way, let's get started. To begin, click on a new project. From there, you can go ahead and name your project, as well as decide where the project file will be placed. If you have a graphics card, you can select it on this drop-down menu here. Graphic cards tend to help with rendering, but if you don't have one, that's not a problem at all. And then we'll go ahead and click OK. After your project file has been created, come up to the top left corner under File, New, and then Create a New Sequence. This is where you'll be placing all of your videos and other assets. A window will pop up with a whole bunch of different options. These are just presets for different camera types, and each has its own parameters and so forth. I just always choose digital SLR because it works with my Canon camera just like it says in the preset description. It'll also give you the size of the video you're editing as well as the frame rate. I always choose 24 because it's cinema standard, and it also gives me a little bit more flexibility when I'm editing clips in slow motion. You can go ahead and give it a name here at the bottom if you want to, and then you can hit enter or OK when you're done. So now that you've created a new sequence, let's take a look at what's in front of you. The timeline. This is your timeline. You'll place your videos and assets here and make all of the cuts to them within this box. This is your program monitor. A preview of your video will display here when the playhead moves through each frame of your video. This is your media browser. When you import videos, pictures, graphics, and more, they are going to appear in here. This is your effects control panel. Here you can adjust the settings of effects that you drop onto your videos. You can also adjust the size, position, and rotation of your video within this panel. You'll also find Lumetri scopes, which is a graph/tool used during the process of color correction, which I'll briefly cover. You can also find an audio panel here as well, allowing you to adjust the volume and balance of the clip. Over here on the right side is the effects browser. Here you'll be able to browse a bunch of presets, video effects, transitions for both audio and video. Below that are additional panels such as Essential Graphics, used for editing text, and Lumetri Color, used for color correction or color grading. If you don't like the way your workspace looks, you can just click and drag to wherever you want to place that within your window, and you'll see wherever I drop it, that's where that new panel will pull up. There are also different workspaces at the top for specific purposes such as coloring, audio, and so on. I usually like sticking with the effects workspace just because that's my favorite one to use. So now that you have the basic layout of the program, let's begin the process of piecing together your first video. Go to File, Import, or you can also hit Control-I on your keyboard. This will bring up a new window where you can locate your videos that you're going to use for your project. Select the videos that you want to use for your project, and then when you're done, hit Open, Enter, whatever one you're comfortable with, and you will see them being imported into your project, and they should show up right here on your left in your media browser. Now, a helpful tip that I've learned to do is to organize your files. If you know you're going to have a lot of assets in your project, separate them by folders. You can do this by clicking on this little folder icon on the bottom. You can name it to whatever you want, and then you can drag and drop your videos into that bin. So now when we double click to open it, we'll see that that video that I just dropped in there is in that folder. I tend to do this when I'm using multiple cameras, or I have a lot of pictures from time lapses that I've taken, or if there are like multiple days to my video project. It just helps me organize myself better, and I can find my videos a whole lot easier when I'm looking for something specific. So now that your videos are in your media browser, you can go ahead and drag and drop them onto your timeline. Depending on the resolution of your source file, you may get a message that looks like this. All it's saying is that you can change the settings of your sequence to match that exact video that you just dropped onto the timeline. I always keep the existing settings because I already have my project set up the way I want it. Let's say you wanted to change your sequence settings though to match this clip resolution. Right now it's 4K, but my sequence is set at 1080p. Then you would just hit the change sequence settings. So now that your video is on the timeline, there are two main tools that you're going to use 90% of the time. The first is the selection tool. This allows you to select and drag and place your video assets all over the timeline. The shortcut for this is V on the keyboard. The second is the razor tool. This lets you make cuts anywhere on the video. The shortcut for this tool is C. So let's say you wanted to stitch the beginning and end of this clip. Essentially, we'll be cutting out the middle. You'll use the razor tool to cut at the end of the beginning clip that you want, and then you're going to use the razor tool to make another cut at the beginning of the ending clip that you want, if that makes sense. Now all you're gonna do is select this middle part, hit delete, and with the selection tool selected, go ahead and drag those two together, and boom, you just made your first cut. This is essentially what editing is at its core. You'll repeat this process for the entire editing phase of the project. Now say you wanted to add some text to your video. Maybe you want to create a title or some subtitles. This is made simply with the type tool. Hit T on your keyboard, or you can push this little T button right here on the side. You could then click on the video preview and type whatever you want. Now to adjust your text from this plain boring Arial text, I think is the default, you can come over here to the right where it says Essential Graphics. From here, make sure your text is highlighted, and then you can adjust the font, you can adjust the size, you can adjust the position of it, and you can adjust the color, background, whether you want it to have a drop shadow, whether you want it to have an outline. There are a whole bunch of options here that you can explore with. If you want your text aligned a certain way, there are these handy little options that you have where you can do the center align horizontally, center align vertically. You can make it aligned to the top of the video, to the bottom of the video, to the side of the video. Whatever style you're going for, whatever your project entails, there are a lot of alignment options that'll make things easier for you. You also see that when you created that text, this little box appeared on your timeline. All this is just that text layer that is then overlaid onto your video. If we come over here to the left and we toggle it off, you'll see that it disappears, which means that this is an asset and you can move it around to wherever you want it to appear. If you want it to appear before, if you want it to appear a little bit later, right at the cut, whatever you want. Let's say you wanted to adjust the way your video looks. You can do this through color correction or color grading. There are plenty of tutorials out there that go into depth and teach color grading pretty well, so feel free to find any of those on YouTube. The best way that I've found to color correct is to come down to this icon and click New Item. You'll get a bunch of options, but the one that you want to choose is Adjustment Layer. A new box will pop up, but you can just leave all the settings the way they are because they should match the sequence settings that you set up earlier when creating your project. If you're familiar with editing photos, then you've already got an idea of how this works. First, drag that adjustment layer onto your timeline, place it above your video layer, and then click on it. Now what you can do is come over to the right and open up Lumetri Color, and you'll see there are a few different panels that you have. I mostly just stick with basic correction. Exposure adjusts the overall brightness of your image. Contrast adds a little bit of punch or fade to your image. Highlights adjust the brighter parts of your image, while whites adjust the brightest parts of your image. On the opposite side, shadows adjust the darker parts of your image, while blacks adjust the darkest part of your image. There's a graph over here on the left that you can use called lumetri scopes. Essentially, it lets you know how bright and dark your image is. Again, I highly suggest finding a good tutorial on YouTube that teaches this better. I'm not the most well versed in this area, but the way that I typically color my videos are to increase the highlights and to decrease the shadows, but it also varies between each clip. I also increase the saturation just a little bit to add a little bit more vibrance to the clip. And now you'll see when I turn this layer on and off, you'll see that the grass has come a little bit more cleaner, a lot of the more colors are popping a bit more. And there are plenty of other options you can do with this. Color grading is a whole world of its own, and you can create some pretty cool looks with that. Now let's add some audio. Audio tracks work pretty similar to videos. They're placed on the timeline and can have a whole slew of effects that can be added to them. Let's say you wanted to start a song out at full volume and then fade out. This is where we introduce keyframes. Keyframes are basically little bits of information that allow you to animate certain effects within the program. You can do this with pretty much anything that has this little stopwatch icon next to it. To create a keyframe, first drag your audio into your timeline. The next thing you're going to want to do is scroll down to this really thin line until you see your icon change into this icon. From here, you'll be able to expand the track that your video or audio clip is on, and you should see this little white line on your audio clip now. If we zoom in, you might be able to see it better. Now, once you see that, hold Control down on your keyboard until you see your icon turn into a mouse with a little plus on the end. You can go ahead and click on that line and you'll see a circle that gets created. Click where you want the fade to begin and then also click where you want the fade to end. These little circles are what will allow you to make the song fade out. Drag the second keyframe down to the bottom, and now when you play back your footage, you should be able to hear your new effect. There are plenty of other audio effects that you can do within Premiere Pro, so make sure you explore and mess around because there are some pretty cool and fun things. So after you've completed your editing and you're ready to compress all of your clips into one video, it's time to render out your video. Come up to File, Export, and then Media. From there, a box will pop up with a bunch of options. You can choose whatever settings you want for your project, but this is what I found works best for me. Make sure your format is changed to H.264. This tends to work pretty well with YouTube uploads. You can change the name and location of your file by clicking on the blue text next to the output name. Name and choose wherever you want the finished product to go. And the last thing that I do is I come down to this section and I scroll down until I see bitrate settings. I changed this from a range of 18 to 20 so that it doesn't compress the video as much but still retains a good quality image. It'll increase the size of your file, but usually not a huge amount. Once you have all of your settings set, you can hit Q or Export. Both of them do the same thing, except Export just compresses the video within Premiere Pro, whereas if you hit Q, Adobe Media Encoder will do the same thing, just within a different software program. And congratulations, you just completed your first video and now you can upload that bad boy to YouTube. Again, this was just a very basic overview of how I edit my videos. This doesn't take into account like any effects that I learned or like all the little like text and graphics that I've created, but there are a ton of tutorials on YouTube that can teach you a whole array of techniques, effects, and more, and I would highly recommend you check some out as you go along. As for the rest of this video, I hope you found it helpful, insightful, or just plain old interesting. I am always open to comments that suggest content that you guys want to see. Last but not least, thank you for watching, and if you made it this far, please consider subscribing, and I will see you later.